Welcome. My name is Sarah Perry, and I am the Finnriver host for this afternoon's Finnriver InCider Space segment, a forum we created to continue growing our community together during these times. So before we begin the Growing Antiviral Herbs with Michael Pilarski, I just have a couple announcements to make. First, as you know, at all of these segments, there will always be a Finnriver host here, and we're here to help. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to send me a private chat down in the chat icon at the bottom, and we'll help you get through it. And just want to acknowledge the potential for any technical kinks, and we ask for your patience and good humor as we go along. And again, feel free to write me a message and we can work through it together. We'll also encourage you to support today's host, Michael. I'll be posting his PayPal account information in the chat section, and we highly encourage if you have the means to do so. Some upcoming events that we have this week. Join us a little after this for a Stay Home, Stay Healthy, Great Books course, and the focus is on Plato's Republic, and that's at 4:30. And then at 7:30 is Chill with Cello with Sage Coy. And then tomorrow, join us for some music trivia. We'll be focusing on the 80s and 90s, so that's going to be lots of fun. And then at 7, bring in your latest writing pieces and share them in the writer's room. Thank you for contributing to InCider Space. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael.
Hi there. Well, I'm excited to be here again to talk about plants. I could talk about plants till the cows come home. Yes, sirree. After spending all these years hanging out with them. So I started farming in 1972, but of course that's when I started, having my own farm. I actually started farming in second grade, picking strawberries on the agricultural team, 8-hour days. And I grew up playing in the woods, and I didn't know the plants that well, so to speak, when I was growing up. But I've always had a love affair with the plants and with the trees. And so here I am today, being able to talk about them. So it's, I see we have RBB, is it there? What's your name? Let's introduce a little bit.
I'm Rebecca.
Rebecca. Hi.
It's part of my email address. I guess that's why I picked it up.
Okay. And where are you sitting at, Rebecca?
I'm in Port Angeles.
Okay. Close by.
Yeah.
I was in Port Angeles yesterday.
Oh.
And so today, last week I talked about growing antivirals, and I covered quite a few. I'll have an anecdote here in a bit. But this week, I actually was going to go on to a new topic. And so if it's okay with Rebecca, the two of the things I wanted to do, one, I wanted to show a couple of wildcrafted natives from yesterday, and then also talk about weeds, medicinal weeds. Of course, some of them will be antiviral, of course, but medicinal weeds is a big topic that I think the world needs to pay really a lot of attention to. And so I think I'll start out with the wildcrafting just to get that out of the way, and then we can dig into a lot of the weeds. So yesterday I was out gathering 2 medicinals to fill some orders, and I'm just going to see how they'll come across if I try to show them on the screen here. This plant here, notice that it's green on one side and white on the other. So the underside is the white, and the top, and of course it's a little hard to see, but this is lungwort lichen. There's a lot of it around Port Angeles and in the Olympic Peninsula and the Pacific Northwest, and its main habitat is on big leaf maple. It will be found also on Sitka spruce, and you might maybe occasionally find it on cottonwood. I've found it on a number of apple trees and sometimes ornamentals on a really wet farm. So this is a tree lichen, and it's used as a, it's the doctrine of signatures say that it looks like lungs. You have all these lobes. Its Latin name is Lobaria pulmonaria. And some botanists really want to call it Sticta pulmonaria, but Lobaria pulmonaria rhymes so much better that I'm sticking with the rhyming taxonomy. And so this lungwort is useful in the lungs. It actually is specific for the lungs and for coughs. It's not a big seller in the medicinal world, but I do get orders for it. And some people do use it. And the way to use it would be fresh tincture, or you can maybe make a dried tea, but most of it's probably sold as tincture. What would I say about it? One is that it's extremely fiddly to clean. This is I pulled out a really nice clump. A lot of them don't look so perfect. And so the goal of the wildcrafter is not only to get the best stuff, but then they have to go through with the scissors and cut off all the little bad parts because there's always decay on some of it. So you have to clean it up, and then off to market it goes. So if you happen to have lungwort in your area, you can count it as a medicinal. Now, what a lot of people don't, I will actually use this lungwort to discuss maybe a little ecological thing. Lichens that grow in trees are symbiotic with the trees. They are producing nitrogen and all kinds of other nutritious elements. And as these fall down on the forest floor, as the rain washes through them and picks up compounds and then falls to the forest floor, this is a major fertilizer. This particular plant is one of the main nitrogen sources in our Pacific Northwest forest where it's found. This is a big nitrogen input, very important. That's what helps big leaf maple trees get so big, is the nitrogen input from this. But the nitrogen flashes around the forest. It doesn't just stay on the big leaf maples. All lichens are useful for their nutrient inputs, but this particular one is very notable. This one, the lungwort, actually reproduces 30% of its biomass per year. In other words, every year, every 3 years, it almost makes up its mass again. So every year, 1/3 of it makes 1/3 new mass, or 30% new mass. This is scientific studies. It will vary from spot to spot. So it grows really rapidly, produces a lot of biomass and a lot of fertility. So I love it, and so does the big leaf maple and the forest. Okay, so there's lungwort. Now here's the next thing. I'm going to show here a devil's club. I don't know if you can see that very well on the screen there, but there are some gnarly spines on this plant. They're not thorns, they're spines. You can see them in the light there a little bit, but they're very stiff. They're barbed. They sometimes have various bacteria on there. Staph, particularly, they're noted for. And they also contain a poison. So it's biological warfare. It's chemical warfare. And it's quite, and the daggers are barbed so that they want to work into the skin and fester. So this is a wonderful plant, but you have to be really careful when you're harvesting it. Here's a bit of the stem. Now, here's where I've used a butter knife without serrations to peel off that outer layer of the spines. As we go along here, you'll see that, again, it's a little hard to tell, but there's a lot of spines on this. I have to take all that off before I can peel the bark, because it's the bark that's medicinal. So I'm going to be peeling the bark of the stem and the root on the devil's club. And what's devil's club good for? Devil's club was you might say, a panacea for the Native Americans here in the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, British Columbia. it was their most favored medicine. It's a general tonic. It's good for, you might say, for just about anything that ails you. So you might actually call it a convalescent herb as well. It is particularly dynamic with the lungs. Again, lungwort was for the lungs, but the Devil's Club is very strong medicine for the lungs. It's used for multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. There are some very virulent forms of tuberculosis in the world today that are immune, or you might say, or resistant, or adapted to a lot of the different antibiotics. So we have multiple antibiotic resistant tuberculosis, and you don't want to get it. But if you do get it, Devil's Club is one of the things that can help you with that particular disorder. It's also used for diabetes, and with the epidemic of diabetes within the Native American community, a fair amount of the natives actually know it specifically for that use. And so if I want to give a gift to a Native American medicine person, I will often bring them a pound bag of dried Devil's Club root bark. And they appreciate that because it's a good medicine. And also they know how much work it is to get a pound of really clean, really good Devil's Club root bark. It's not particularly easy. So it's a great gift, and it's a give back to our Native people. We should be giving back to them after all they've done to produce such a great ecosystem here, and after all the shoddy behavior that us white settlers have bestowed upon the Native people here. It's about time we did a little reparations. Okay, so there's Devil's Club a little bit, and so I won't say too much more unless, in case, does anybody have any questions about the Devil's Club before I move on? Because I'm not focusing on it too much here, but I see Nikki and Katie back there, Rebecca or Sarah. Okay. Questions on the lungwort? Okay, so I'm going to bounce back to antivirals for a minute. So last week I talked about, maybe 10 different antiviral herbs. And one of them was a herb called Lomatium dissectum, a native root to the eastern Washington. And I pointed out that it was a very good antiviral, one of the strongest in the country, maybe one of the strongest in the world. And I said, well, we can't really say that it works against COVID or not, because there just hasn't been, who's tested it. Interestingly, my son came over the other day, we were talking, and he said, hey, did you hear that our friend T, one of our friends, had COVID locally? And he said, and we got her some of this Lomatium dissectum. And her and her partner started taking it. And they took it, they really got into it. And they found that their COVID case dramatically improved. It still took them time to get over it, but they could tell as soon as they started taking it, it's like, oh my goodness, I feel so much better now. Things are not as bad. So it was, this is anecdotal evidence, no scientific double-blind study, no using mice or hares or chimpanzees to test out the diseases on. No, it was just that these people said, wow, we really noticed the difference. Her sister, who also had it, did not take the Lomatium, and she was in a much more pathetic state. It was much tougher for her to get through it. So it appears the Lomatium dissectum is a useful antiviral that will help resolve COVID issues or, reduce the severity of symptoms. Okay, so I just wanted to give that little report on Lomatium.
Could I ask a question? This is Kitty.
Pardon?
Could I ask a question, please?
Oh, sure, anytime.
Yeah, so the Lomatium, I seem to be allergic to that. Is it, I've only tried it once, and it was
You got a rash?
preserved in honey. And I had a major allergy attack, and so
A what attack?
a major allergy attack.
Allergy, yes. Okay. All right. Well,
Blood cells and all that.
okay, so let's look at that. Last week I mentioned this when I talked about Lomatium dissectum, and so it's great that you're bringing it up again. So Lomatium dissectum on a small percentage of people gets an allergic reaction. It's usually a rash, but you having an allergic response is not. So I guess you might say it's not unheard of. It happens in a small percentage of people, and you appear to be one of them. Well, now you were taking the root, the whole root, preserved in honey, or were you taking honey that had the root removed?
I had just a piece of the Lomatium that had been soaking in the honey.
Okay, so here's my hypothesis. It's not mine alone. That when you ingest Lomatium directly, it's more likely to give the rash, or to more people, than if it's in a tinctured form, where you're just getting a sort of, you might say, some of the extract. So by eating a piece of it, that may give you a more allergic response than using the tincture. However, there's no doubt that you should, if you ever felt like up to trying the tincture again, you would try a very small dose, like maybe start like a 4-drop dose or something, and see what kind of reaction you get. It might be that the tincture may not be, might be okay for your system, but since you've already had this one upset, you may not want to try it again, or you may just not be the medicine for you.
Well, thank you very much. I will try just a little bit of the tincture and just check it out.
Okay, great. Yeah, watch for any other response. Usually of the cases of the people that get it, generally what happens is that if they just discontinue use, whatever response they're having goes away. I've never heard of anybody actually getting, you might say, permanently damaged or anything. So, but thanks for pointing that out to us. So I cross my fingers for you. Okay, so what I thought I would talk about today, and we still have most of the time left, is talking about medicinal weeds. And this would be a great time, of course, to have really good technology assistance here. And flash pictures of these herbs I'm going to talk about on the screen. But basically, you all know them, or most of them. So I'm going to go through a list of herbs, of weeds. Now, I'm going to hold up here very briefly here. This is my catalog of plants that I sell. And if we go, it's just not going to be, it's not going to really give you the, a good enough, let's see here, a good enough reading to actually read it. I'm just going to step it back here, but suffice it to say that we sell about 150 different botanicals. And generally about 15% of those herbs are weeds, what we call weeds, invasive, non-native, sometimes noxious, sometimes just sort of innocuous, but non-native invasive plants. So, so I make a fair amount of my living from weeds. And I am currently writing a letter to the earth restoration camps of the world with information on how they can use the weeds and the plants on their restoration camps for medicine and forage. In other words, wildcrafting food and medicine from what's growing wild where you are. And I say that it's real important to know the edible, and the wild edible and medicinal plants where you live, because then you can help take care of yourself. You don't need a budget, you don't need grants, you don't need to have a job necessarily, or it reduces it, you might say, the need for that money, because you can get some of your own needs yourself. And I said in the letter that you should pay especially careful attention to the weeds. Wherever you are, pay really good attention. You should really be trying to learn the weeds. So I've been doing this for years. I collect books on weeds. I actually, if I live long enough, I would write a book on the uses of weeds and how to control them without herbicides. So I research weeds a lot. And like I say, I make money on them. So I'm going to start with the number one weed is dandelion. Dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, is one of the, I would say it's one of the superheroes of the plant kingdom. It's one of the most widespread plants in the whole world. I mean, you'll find it in more habitats, in more places than just about any other plant in the world. Particularly, you would say everywhere in the temperate zones, and you'll find it in Hawaii, and it doesn't restrict itself to temperate zones, but that's where it's especially at home. So it's found its way around the world. It is a excellent medicinal. It's particularly for the liver is oftentimes quoted what it's useful for. It's a nutritive herb. It had lots of nutrition, lots of minerals. I know a woman who had cancer of the lymphatic system, lymphoma, and the doctors gave her X amount of time to live. And she was not about to give up easily. And one of the things, I remember her coming to me once, and when she was in the throes of this, and she said, here's my diagnosis, here's what's going on. She says, I've done a lot of research on what to do. And she said, I've decided to go on a 100% dandelion root diet. That's all I'm going to eat. Can you help supply me? And I said, sure, I'll help supply you with dandelion root. And so she ate, I don't know how much dandelion root she ate every day, but that was, if not the only, it was the major part of her diet. And she lived for, I don't have the exact statistics, but a lot longer than the doctors thought she would. And she did succumb, but it really improved. It really was one of the things that that's a pretty drastic thing to be dealing with. So dandelion has so many uses, and you can look them up. And we're going to talk not only dandelion medicinal uses, but edible as well. Everybody knows that the flower is edible and great in salads. I don't know how many of you tried dandelion wine, but it can be quite good. There's enough dandelions to make enough wine. We could strangle the grape wine industry. I don't think we will, but there's enough of it out there. One of the variety, all know that dandelion has white milky juice. In Russia in World War II, they were cut off from rubber, or possibly World War I, but they were cut off from rubber for a period of time. So they were getting their rubber from dandelion. They grew big fields of dandelion, got all that white milky sap out of it, and they made rubber. It was a rubber plant. Dandelion, the leaves are edible. We all know that, especially tender and young. The root is edible. I talked to a woman the other day. She said that she had been in Siberia recently, backcountry Siberia, and some of the villages during the great Soviet breakup, things were so tough there that she said that some of them survived, that one of their main foods, survival foods during that period of time was a dandelion root. So dandelion root can keep you alive if there's a shortage of other things. It's one of the things that's almost always available. Every part of it is edible. Good to know. So medicinal and edible. And last year, I made $500 on the dandelions in my quarter-acre herb patch. I let them go to seed the year before. I've been encouraging them. I let them grow in the rows. And so every 2 years or every year I go through and I harvest the big ones. So I like to get them like 2 or 3 years old. 2 years is really good. They're much bigger than a 1-year plant. So I'm out there harvesting every year, the big ones. And last year made $500 on the dandelions. So dandelions can actually make you some good money. I found out in the past that if you dump about 2 inches of chips, coarse chips on top of a lawn that has dandelion, it can kill the grass for the most part, but the dandelions make it through, and then you end up with extra fat, big dandelion. So you can if you've got dandelion in your yard, you should be trying to get rid of the grass and increase the dandelion. You go counter to what most people are doing. Okay, another weed. Any questions on dandelion, though? I should ask at the end of every little session here. Dandelion. Okay. Let's go to
Skeeter,
wild.
Skeeter,
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So I recently read that the flowers have as much or more health benefits as the roots. Do you agree?
I hadn't heard that. So I guess I would be surprised, but I don't know enough to say about that. Like I say, I'm a little skeptical, but I don't know. So bears more research. There's a lot of, at any rate, dandelion root tea is very good. Dandelion roots eaten. As soon as you make dandelion into a tincture, it becomes a stronger herb, and you have to exercise more care. You can have all the dandelion in the world you want, but if you have dandelion tincture, you do have to be careful on your, not to overdose. It'd probably take a while, but possible. Maybe that's why dandelion wine tastes so good. Now, another weed is a wild lettuce. Especially us vegetable growers will know wild lettuce. I have an order for 45 pounds of wild lettuce, so it's on my mind. I've been letting it, 2 years ago, I let it go to seed a lot in my garden. And as a result, I had a good crop last year. This year, last year I controlled the weeds. I didn't let them seed much. And so this year I seem to have a smaller crop. So you have to, it's interesting to note that you on a farm you can work with the weed as a crop by how much you weed it. You can weed too much, maybe you can weed it too much, sometimes you can weed it too little. What is that magic spot for the a good quantity of it, but not too much? Wild lettuce is a sedative. The plant has, again, milky juice, and it's related to lettuce. You know, you could say lettuce is slightly sedating, but the wild lettuce is more so. So it's a lightweight or a small scale, you could call it a narcotic, I guess, but a sedative, a bit of a painkiller, calming herb. So I'm looking for I'm visiting local farms to find out who's got good wild lettuce as a weed on their place, and then I can help them weed. Another weed that is, let's look, what's another really common one? Shepherd's purse. Let's look at the weed shepherd's purse. I just harvested that the other day for an order. It is Capsella bursa pastoris is the Latin. Capsella means the capsule that is like the purse of the shepherd, bursa pastoris. And it stops bleeding. It's a strong plant for styptic, for stopping bleeding. I know that some midwives carry a tincture of fresh plant. It can't be dried. It has to be fresh. Fresh plant tincture of shepherd's purse administered can stop a woman that's bleeding after giving birth, and she's bleeding too profusely to stop that profuse bleeding. Now that's a strong herb. So you have to know what you're doing, but it is a strong styptic. So it's one of probably its main use. And it's also it's a pretty common weed in gardens, farms. And you can also eat the young flowering tips of it. So it's also a salad vegetable. Another herb is sheep sorrel. Sheep sorrel. sorrels in the sorrel family. It's in the rhubarb family. It's in the yellow dock family. In fact, it's Rumex. Okay, what are we? Let's see. Sheep sorrel, Rumex acetosala. In other words, acetosala, aceto vinegar, acetic acid. It's a sour herb. You can eat it as a edible. The leaves. Its main medicinal use is the root, the whole plant actually, but especially the root of the sheep sorrel is used in the SCAC anti-cancer formula. So it's one of the, I have a friend who makes the product, and she says that the sheep sorrel is actually one of the, she considers it the heavy hitter, or one of the, if not the main ingredient, one of the main ingredients in the SCAC formula. So the root is very small, and it's dark yellow, or it's a yellow color, vibrant yellow, similar to a good quality yellow dock. And so the herb is going to be acting on the liver, and I'm not sure, I don't know the mechanisms. I just know that it's used in the SCAC anti-cancer formula related to yellow dock. There's a lot of medicinals in that family. And it grows as a weed in many gardens, or at least in some gardens. It's a relatively common weed. And if you did have it, that is something that you can pull up and wash the roots. It's fiddly work to clean up a batch of roots. As a result, I charge $150 per pound for the dried root. It's my most expensive root. I once was looking at an herb catalog, a national herb catalog, and they were selling 100 plus types of herbs, and I was going through it, looking at the prices, seeing what was expensive. It was interesting. The sheep sorrel herb was the most expensive herb on that list, even beat golden seal. So that is expensive. So there is some market for sheep sorrel. And if you have any of these in your garden, then you should definitely research. You might say, I like to make a list of all the weeds in my garden and learn the Latin names. And then I go to the books, the edible books, the medicinal books, and I look up the uses. And then I have growing in my garden or in my yard or in my neighborhood, all these weeds that are useful. And so you can bet that probably approximately, or at least 50% of the weeds that grow where you are medicinal and or edible. So very, very great group of plants to get to know. And the nice thing about weeds is that they're going to be there even if you didn't get around to gardening, or there was too much rain or too much sun or whatever. The weeds are a reliable crop. And I would say this, that in general, the weeds that grow where you live are going to be more nutritious and have greater health benefits and greater food benefits, you might say, more of a superfood than the things you can grow. So a lot of people are busy weeding their gardens of the best of the most nutritious food and throwing it away so they can eat their broccoli and tomatoes. So we could use a little bit more respect for the herbs. So I hope that you'll get that out of this show here. Another herb that most people really dislike is burdock. And especially if you're a livestock owner or a dog owner, and you know those burdock burrs can get caught in their coat and just be, you have to cut out the whole area a lot of times. So really a real pain for livestock and dogs and anything that's got a lot of hair. And of course, it's a non-native medicinal. The root of the burdock is again a really good medicinal. It's in Japan, it's eaten as a food and as under the term gobo root. Gobo root is burdock root. It's just sort of you might say, bred up variety to produce especially long and thin, or we would say long, less forking, larger roots. And so I will grow the gobo variety, but I also will dig up the wild burdock as well. So the burdock root is one of the biggest of the weedy roots, and it's got a lot of food value in it. It is also specific to the liver and to the improving the liver function, and as a result, it's said that it's good for helping clean the blood. I use it in formulas to assist the colon. It's a very slight laxative, but it helps tonify and helps the colon to do its job. And it also helps the liver to do its cleaning up the blood and cleaning the impurities out of the system. So burdock is really good in convalescence and really good when you're dealing with a sickness or you're doing any kind of detoxification. If I was doing detox, you would definitely want to, it'd be great to accompany with it burdock root or burdock tea in its various forms. The roots can be very deep. I usually dig them with a deep steel bar in the wild. In the gardens, I grew one 2 years ago that was a 10-pound root, biggest burdock root I've ever grown, 10 pounds. And what do I charge for a pound of burdock root here? Let's see here. I'm charging $10 a pound, so that's $100 root. If you get that's about, it's almost a world record. Just kidding, but I bet they grow some mighty big ones in Japan. So and another thing to note is that the burdock seed itself, is a bit stronger medicine than the root. It's a more concentrated form. So whatever the burdock root can do, the burdock seed can do, and even a bit stronger. So burdock seed, you have to get it out of the burr. It's a pain to clean out the seed, but I do that as well. So seed and root on the burdock. If you're in a pinch, you can also eat the greens. You can cook them up, especially at the younger stage, and you can get a food out of the leaves as well. Another weed, chickweed. I just shipped an order of chickweed out recently. Chickweed is endemic where we live here. Again, non-native, but it's almost every garden in this maritime region. And it grows really fast in the winter and in the spring, and it sort of kicks back in the summer, dies back, and then comes on again in the fall. So you might call it a seasonal ground cover, but it's kind of a hassle if you're trying to grow a lot of things. So it works in some parts of the farm, but other parts you're trying to control it. The chickweed tops, the aerial part, I clip it off with the scissors when it's in bloom, early to mid-season bloom. White flowers, a lot of leafy greens where there's not too many grasses or weeds. You're trying to, so the purer the stand, the better as far as how fast you can collect it. Chickweed is mainly used in skin salves, so it's not like a antiviral or a heavy hitter, but it nourishes the skin and is used in a lot of skin products. So that's, and of course, most of you would know that chickweed is also quite edible as a green in the salad. So again, there's a medicinal edible leaf. Cleavers. Cleavers is another non-native. It's a Gallium aparine. It's in the coffee family. Interestingly enough, there's not many coffee family plants that make it up this far. And so some people have been so desperate for coffee at times that they've collected the seeds of the cleavers and roasted them up and ground them up to make a coffee substitute. So there's a desperate people for you. They were probably cut off from coffee in Europe during World War II when that discovery was made. because once you have coffee, of course, you always want coffee. And so you'll be looking for the substitutes. So their cleaver is specific to the lymphatic system. It's a lymphatic tonic, and it stimulates the tonic to work better, tonifies it. It's just, anytime you're detoxifying, any kind of lymph ailment, anything to do with the lymph system, gallium or cleavers is going to help you. A common name for cleavers is bed straw. And so this would have been for poor people in Europe in the old days. They couldn't afford a nice cotton mattresses. You could take some fabric and stuff it with a dried cleavers or bed straw, because it's springy, wants to hold its shape, gives you quite a bit of padding. Of course, you'll want it to be thoroughly dry before you pack it in there. And so bed straw was a mattress stuffing at one time. Don't know anybody using it that way these days. So the time to harvest the cleavers, by the way, for the medicine is in the early flowering stage. I like it flowering, and some green seed heads are set, but you aren't getting brown or ripe seed heads yet. So some green seed heads, some bloom. That's my optimum timing for harvesting the cleavers, to send that off to the medicine makers. It's usually 2, 3, even up to 4 feet long at that point. Another weed. Let's look through my list here. I didn't have one all made up ahead of time, so we're just gonna hop around here and look for a few more here. St. John's wort. St. John's wort is a noxious weed in the state of Washington, and one of the best nerve system remedies. St. John's wort got famous some years ago for a feel-good herb or for antidepressant. But the mode of action of St. John's wort, of course, there's a number of them, but one of them is that it actually repairs damaged nerve endings. So it's a nerve repairer, and there's not that many things that repair damaged nerve endings. So any kind of stress or nervous disorder, people should really look at St. John's wort. It's sometimes called sunshine in a bottle. The oil is used topically in massage oils. You can use the oil or the tincture rubbed into the sciatic meridian for sciatic pain, sciatica. Too many people with sciatica out there. They should know about St. John's wort. They can self-administer. They can take it internally as well as that rubbing it on externally into the actual meridians or the pain. So St. John's wort would be, things like fibromyalgia, nerve pain. Specifically, you should look at it for that. It is an antiviral, so it's one of the things that you could use for. It is for viruses, and you won't find it in your garden as a weed that much. It's more out in the wild. In eastern Washington, it's super abundant. Covers huge fields, thousands, tens of thousands of acres. Become quite a problem in some places. However, I've noticed over the years that because I collect this stuff big time, hundreds of pounds a year. And I've noticed over the years that it moves around. So it'll be in this one field and it'll be really thick and I can go there and harvest it and make money. 5, 10 years later, it's almost gone. It comes through as a wave. Weeds sometimes will stick around, certain weeds, but they tend to come in waves over time. They come in, they're strong, then they gradually will cut back on there, and another weed will come in. So a lot of times there's waves of weeds. So it's interesting to pay attention to what's coming and going. In Western Washington, where most of our viewers are here, It's almost always found alongside roads. It doesn't leave roadsides very much. And so if you're trying to collect it here, but you don't want it to be covered, if the road's very busy, then there's too much car exhaust, etc. And on a lot of country roads, it blooms in midsummer, even through the summer. And so if it's a country road and there's not much traffic, but it's a dusty dirt road, then you can get a lot of dust on it. So you have to be careful. So it's harder to find St. John's wort weeds in a good situation here in Western Washington. But if you can, you should definitely be paying attention for it, because it is such a good medicine. Pretty much all the medicinal people are going to want it in their kit. Another weed to watch out for dust is mullein. Mullein is a non-native invasive plant. Western Washington, Eastern Washington, again, very widespread. It'll be one of the first things to come up on a gravel pile, exposed ground, really tough ground. It's very adaptable, and the leaves it's super drought tolerant. The leaves are covered with this fine woolly hairs that make it very soft. And hence people oftentimes promote it as a butt wipe or toilet paper in the wild. However, those hairs are irritating to sensitive membranes, and I do not recommend mullein leaves for that purpose. It's sort of a misnomer, but it must work often enough that it has that reputation. Mullein, because of the hairs, is drought tolerant. It keeps the air movement off the surface of the plant. It also means that it really traps dust. So if you're in any kind of a place where there's road traffic and dust floating around, you have to get your mullein away from the road, because mullein tends to get dirty and hold that dust if there's any around. So you want it in a non-dusty habitat. The leaves are used medicinally, mainly for, someone mentioned allergies, sometimes for allergies, and specifically for asthma. A toke or a few tokes, you can take it as a tea, but a few tokes of the leaf, actually, of the smoke, actually relaxes the bronchial tubes and opens them up. So mullein helps open up the passages in the lungs. There's other things that do that as well, but mullein is a weed that is specific for that. The mullein root is used as well. I believe it's in prostate medicines. I forget the exact uses of mullein root, but it's used somewhat. The mullein flower is famous as a ear oil. They make a infused olive oil with mullein flowers for earaches. It's very specific for that. So anyway, so there's, I had a person last year who for the last 2 years running has purchased almost all the mullein leaf I can produce, which is a great, which is a very large box of mullein leaf dried. It's a lot of mullein leaf, and his wife uses it for her asthma, and so he buys a large amount of mullein leaf every year for her. And she goes through a lot. I'm amazed. It's something like 12 pounds or 15 pounds a year. Let's see. I can keep looking through the list, but maybe I'll ask you. Think of another weed that you want me to cover, another weed or another medicinal weed particularly. Think. Weeds. Okay. Let's look at horsetail. Horsetail, if you're a farmer or a gardener and you have horsetail in your garden, that is very difficult to eradicate. They have long runners under the ground. They just all want to keep coming up. It's very difficult to eradicate. It's a very ancient plant, so very successful, and it's particularly used for building bones and ligaments and tendons and damaged structural membranes of the body. If somebody's got a broken leg or anything like that, you should definitely be taking horsetail tea while you're rebuilding that bone. Silica and calcium. It works with those two elements, helps them get fixed in the body. It's also a heavy metal accumulator. It accumulates all kinds of heavy metals, good guys and bad guys. In the old days, in the gold mining days, smart miners, if they had a sandbar in a river and they wondered if there was much gold there, they could get a whole bunch of that horsetail and send the ash in, burn a bunch of it up and send it into the gold essayist who will tell them the quantity of gold in there. That would give them some idea. Horsetail, if you're in a polluted environment, especially with heavy metals, would be a no-no, because you don't want to uptake heavy metals and then use that in your tea. So you again need it to be in a, you might say, relatively pristine or non-toxic environment. And the nettles you only harvest it when it's young, because as it gets older, the silica content becomes too gnarly for the body, and then it can actually injure the kidney tubes, etc. So in other words, you do have to know the correct timing of your horsetail harvest, which is early, not late. Okay, well, I see we have 7 minutes left, so we're let me see if I can spot a couple more, any other weeds here. In particular,
Michael, I am in an area where there's a lot of overgrown Scotch broom. Do you know any
yeah.
uses of Scotch broom?
I actually just looked at Scotch broom there, and I said, no, maybe I won't talk about Scotch broom because Scotch broom does have medicinal uses, but it's a very strong medicine. It's one of those what you call a low dose botanicals. The flowering twigs, I just sent an order out the other day for the flowering twigs with the leaves, the bark, and the flowers, and it's used as a heart stimulant, very similar to foxglove. In other words, it could help kickstart somebody's heart that's failing, but it's the kind of thing you have to be an expert to use. It's a low dose. You would use very small amounts. You have to know what you're doing, not for the layperson. It's interesting that it's in the folklore of Europe as a psychoactive drug. If you take enough of it, or you might say too much of it, you actually can get similar effects to things like henbane or belladonna, things of that sort. In other words, you will have an altered experience. But of course, these altered experiences can also kill you. So knowing that, again, I don't recommend it for recreational use, but it has been used by the shamanic practitioners of Europe in the past for that particular use. What I do think of for Scotch broom, though, because I don't hate Scotch broom like some people, it's really good. It's a nitrogen fixer. It's really good at fixing, at improving soils, particularly gravel soils that are nutrient deficient. It's relatively easy to get rid of for a shrub, and we just need more management of it. There's too much of it out there for sure. And so we should be doing more Scotch broom management, but not with herbicide. Hand pulling works pretty good for Scotch broom. And it can be ground up if it's not in the seed stage, and it makes a great chip. You might say fertilizer chip. But again, you have to do that. You don't want to do that when it has ripe seed on it. So there's just a couple of little tidbits about the Scotch broom. So
Skeeter, I don't have a question, but my daughter, who is about 30 now, was out pulling Scotch broom yesterday off the edge of her property, and she got some kind of, I'm going to call it a rash. It doesn't look like rash, but it looks like the tiki eye up the side of her hand, across her wrist, and up the inside of her arm, up to her elbow. And I'm pretty sure it's from the Scotch broom. And then I did look it up, and I guess Scotch broom can cause some skin reactions. That's the first time I've seen that, but it did look like petechiae. You know, I've seen it, petechiae on the face from somebody who was, starved of oxygen, but I've never seen it on an arm before.
Okay. Any chance there's poison oak or poison ivy around?
No, nothing. It's in her yard, and there was nothing.
Okay. I would suspect that in some cases. Yeah. Okay. I hadn't heard of that reaction before. But there's a word to the audience out there. Anybody that watches this later, be careful of that. I've never experienced it, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time pulling Scotch broom either. I harvest it, like I say, but it's a lot different than wrenching away on it. Okay, word to the wise. Thank you. I think let's see here. Maybe we'll just wrap this up here because we have 3 minutes remaining in the show time here. And I see Nikki and Katie put a little chat in here. I love there's this dandelion syrup. I love fresh drink mixed with seltzer or water. So at any rate, there's a traditional Scandinavian dandelion syrup. So there's a special thing for somebody to make. Okay, so that's with the flower she's pointing out, the flower syrup. And I think someone else has told me about that recently too, that they're starting a little business with dandelion syrup. Okay, well that's just a few of the weeds that I particularly use and sell. There's some other ones we didn't get to, but there's some of the better weeds. Plantain, of course, plantain's a common weed that's also used for skin conditions as well, and also another pot herb that you can eat. So that goes on and on. The list of the weeds are our friends much more than they are our enemies. I always like to say that the weeds aren't the problem. It's that there's not enough humans helping take care of the planet and taking care of the earth. You know, reducing the Scotch broom is not like it can't be controlled. It means that everybody's so busy doing jobs, a lot of jobs that may not be very worthwhile. There's a lot of people that don't have work, and there's a lot of people doing work that's, you might say, kind of make work. And we need more people out there helping manage the environment, helping reduce weeds, and plant natives, and just taking care of the environment. So here it is, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and everybody should be thinking kindly about the earth and the plants, should be spending some time in the garden. And if, like most Americans or most people on the planet, you're under stress right now, spending some time outdoors with the plants is good for you. We need to spend some time out there with the plants to help keep our sanity in these days and times. So good luck, everybody out there. And thank you, Finnriver, for hosting this.
Thank you so much, Michael, for all of your insight and knowledge. I sure enjoyed it. And thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you back next week.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Yes, we'll make a list of what next week's topics ahead of time, hopefully. All right, bye-bye.